Hello. Good morning, everyone. Today is April 13th, 2022, and the time is 9:16. The AB 3121 Task Force meeting is now called to order. Good morning. My name is Camila Moore, and I'm the chairperson of the task force. Before we begin, let us have staff do a roll call for attendance and establish whether we have a quorum. Parliamentarian Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will begin to call the roll, beginning with Madam Chair.
Present.
Vice Chair Brown,
Present.
Member Bradford, Member Grills,
Present.
Member Holder, Member Jones Sawyer,
Present from Iceland.
thank you. Member Tamaki.
Here.
Member Lewis.
Present.
Member Montgomery Stepp. Madam Chair, there are 9 members on the task force. We need to have 5 present for quorum. We have 7 present. A quorum has been established.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. So we'll now move to the second item of the agenda, which is public comment. But before we do so, I want to acknowledge Pastor Brown. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, I erred. There are 6 present, but you still have a quorum.
Thank you so much. So there are 9 task force members, and the number needed for quorum is 5. The number present is 6, so a quorum has been established. Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. So now I would just like to turn it to Pastor Brown in the event that you have any opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Moore. I must say, in the words of one of the sons of Third Baptist, Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III, who will be the principal speaker for our mass meeting this evening at 7 o'clock. His words, his memorable words are, I am peacock proud, hyena happy, and elephant elated that this task force, AB 3121, is having its first in-person meeting here in the state of California. Under the very capable, substantive, enlightened, and courageous leadership of our chairperson, a young lady of great distinction, dignity, and devotion to the liberation of the sons and daughters of Africa who reside in this state. Let's give our chairperson a big round of applause. And we have this dream team, a strong line of members of this task force who are gathered here with yours truly in order that we will take care of the people's agenda. We come from different backgrounds, disciplines, experiences, and great records of accomplishment in our own careers. However, I must say that with all sincerity, this task force is all needed to do the incredible, to do the miraculous feat of having California set the pace, establish the bar as to what America morally must do in order to make amends for that evil system of enslavement of our ancestors for nearly 250 years. This is April the 13th, and in our culture, our parlance, and our tradition, supposedly the number 13 symbolizes bad luck, evil, travesty. But I say to you, this task force that meets here at the historic Third Baptist Church on April the 13th carries with it great historicity. For on April the 13th, 1858, sons and daughters of Africa gathered in the city of St. Francis at the first AME Zion Church. They met that night to celebrate the release of a young man from the native state of Mississippi, of our chairperson and yours truly. This young man, R.C. Lee, at the age of 19, was enslaved by the Charles Stovall family from Carrollton County, Mississippi. He came here with his enslaver, and though California was a free state, but he sought as a visitor to this state to make this brother a hired enslaved person. The long short of it is that because of blacks in this city, Starr King of the First Unitarian Church, the Broderick and Baker families who were abolitionists, because of their tenacity, because of their courage, this young man, R.C. Lee, was set free. At the first AME Zion Church, I repeat, they celebrated back there in 1858. And then fast forward, it was on April the 13th, 1958, that the great scholar, social activist, and critic of this evil system of enslavement, W.E.B. Du Bois, celebrated his 90th birthday right here in this sanctuary, and later next door with his wife, Shirley Graham, cut his cake before he went to China to meet with Chairman Mao, and later repatriated to Ghana, West Africa, because he discovered that this thing of racism and evil sides of capitalism was unbearable. So today, thank God that April 13th has history to it, but more importantly, it brings great meaning and prospects for tomorrow. For I am convinced that under the leadership of this chair and the fellowship and support and buttress of every one of the members of this task force, we are going to give it our best, and California will find it to be difficult to refuse to support what we come up with as rational, reasonable, substantive actions to pay back African Americans for the evils of enslavement that has been perpetrated against us. So thank you for coming to be a part of history, but also to be a part of a great purposeful movement of reparations for the sons and daughters of Africa. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank you for the privilege of my giving these introductory remarks as a Baptist preacher who is tempted every time when he sees a crowd to take a text and give an oration. God bless you. Thank you.
so much, Vice Chair Brown. I'd also like to recognize, hi, Senator Bradford. Before we go to public comment, I also want to make a brief acknowledgement to the Los Angeles City Council. The Los Angeles City Council is the largest city council in the state of California and the second largest city council in the nation. And after our March hearing on April 12th, the Los Angeles City Council unanimously supported AB 3121. So I want to acknowledge the Los Angeles City Council for their leadership. Thank you so much. So now we'll move on to the next item on our agenda item number 2, which is public comment, which will last for an hour. We have people on the phone lines and people in person. And so what we'll do is privilege the people in person first and for 30 minutes and then transition to 30 minutes for phone line public comment. So thank you so much, Ms. Aisha Martin Walton, for your assistance. And you may begin when you are ready. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Now's the time. Good morning, Chair Moore, task force members, and public. My name's Aisha Martin Walton, and I'm with the Department of Justice, and we would like to hear from you. The public comment period again is 1 hour, and we will hear public comment from the public first. So with that, just a couple of instructions. It's 3 minutes. You will be given a cue card of a 1-minute warning, and your time is close to be up. And you might be slightly interrupted at the 3-minute mark. So with that, why don't we have the first speaker?
Good morning. My name is Sharice Cryer, and I traveled from Los Angeles to be with you today. Dr. Javon Scott Lewis, I thank God for you. You embody integrity and sacrifice your personal interests to help move this legislation forward. To our other Jamaican American on the task force, Mrs. Holder, my family still owns the land where my enslaved ancestors are buried. I first saw my enslaved ancestors' worn headstone with my own eyes at 14 or 16, a woman who endured slavery and whose name is engraved on a historical marker in Sabine County, Texas. It was traumatic for me to hear you claim over and over that it would be too hard for Black people to trace their lineage. I come from a family of landowners, business owners, valedictorians, educators, sharecroppers, homemakers, midwives, moonshiners, veterans. My ancestor, Robert Rogers, escaped slavery to fight in the Civil War, and I have his pension record. And this is where the sabotage part comes in, Senator Bradford. I'm going to cast doubt on the testimony of the preeminent scholar in American constitutional law and say it's too hard for Black Americans to find their ancestors, because if my family can't get into this claim, neither can yours. Too often, there's an assumption held by other minority communities that immigrate to this country that Black Americans are lazy, not smart, not hard workers, and don't know their ancestral history. This myth is a result of white supremacy and America's caste system. Chairman Moore tried to bring this up in her edits last month. Black Americans are bottom caste. Speaking of ancestors, Mr. Jones Sawyer, I hear Black social media was able to find your ancestors before 1940 in a few minutes. It is common knowledge that you're related to a member of the Little Rock Nine. That wasn't that long ago, and neither was slavery. I'm here to represent information about a reparations super fund, as I provided in my public comments and follow-up email to the DOJ in July 2021. California cannot solve reparations on its own. The federal government must be involved. From Here to Equality mentions the super fund. My offer still stands to the task force if anyone wants a copy. I brought one with me. Task force members, please work with the federal government to reestablish the Freedmen's Bureau, to handle reparations claims and payments, and create a reparations super fund. California should send all of its reparation payments to the super fund, thereby eliminating the need for a residency requirement. It won't matter where you're living. Every eligible party will receive the same payment amount from the fund. And I have a presentation and elaboration on the idea in writing. I will leave for the DOJ and the task force members. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is Hatim Mansouri. I just graduated last year from Morehouse College with a degree in philosophy. And I'm here today to be a voice of the youth and be a voice of reason. And I want to speak about my opinion about reparations in California and reparations as a whole. I want to like quench any doubt that for anybody that might be listening, that it's not a matter of if reparations should be implemented, but really it should be how. And it's not even a matter of when, because it should have been yesterday. Should have been back when slavery was emancipated. Should have been a long time ago. Slavery should have never happened. But now that we're here, reparations should have been yesterday. So the point of if should reparations be implemented, it's a common sense answer. It's a logical, reasonable, rational answer that is of course. Why is this the case? Well, reparations were implemented to other minorities, other ethnic groups, other races. Native Americans have reparations to this day. The Japanese got reparations. The Jews got reparations. Anybody who was wronged should have reparations. And obviously, African Americans, African descendants of slaves were wronged, so we should give them reparations. If we're gonna keep talking about how much money and how should we give it, in what forms, those are reasonable conversations to have. But let's not talk about should we give it to them. Obviously, yes, of course. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here, and thank you for having this in person with us. Can you hear me okay? Good morning. Thank you for having us. My name is Alita Torre. I represent the Richmond Progressive Alliance. I represent the EC for the Afro Socialists as DSA, and I also represent what I'm going to talk about right now for 1 minute, the Got Reparations Black Box Mobilization Campaign. We just had our first hearings in Vallejo, Marin City, and next month is Vallejo. We just did Marin City. I wanted to say we're dedicating, because we don't want to really talk about all the 57 county organizations. We want to leave this with you. We're doing this grassroots work to support the task force. We know you all have a job, but we have young people with these shirts that say "Got Reparations," and they are going to places that maybe you will not be able to. And that black box will represent in front of soul food restaurants, barbershops, mosques, churches, as well as beauty salons and places where African American can go to leave their testimonies that we would put together as a data collecting. But we are trying to say this one thing. It's dedicated to those Black cities. Please note media. Kennett, California. Beard, California. Elmore, California. And Morley, California. Those cities that were put underwater, drowned here in California. We cannot forget, and we must make sure to represent and hear from everyone. So thank you again, and please stay connected with us.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Speaker, please.
My name is Ansar El Mohammed, and I'm a member of the Nation of Islam. I first and foremost want to remind everyone that the land should be, the inheritance should be given to those that were affected by the slavery. And that's our position. It should be lineage. I'm going to read something from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad of the program that he presented. And this is from point number 4. And first and foremost, I remain open in the name of Allah, who came in the person of Master Fard Muhammad and raised as our messenger, the glorious, most honorable Elijah Muhammad. What do the Muslims want? We want our people in America whose parents or grandparents were descendants from slaves to be allowed to establish a separate state or territory of their own, either on this continent or elsewhere. We believe that our former slave masters are obligated to provide such land and that the area must be fertile and minerally rich. We believe that our former slave masters are obligated to maintain and supply our needs in this separate territory for the next 20 or 25 years until we are able to produce and supply our own needs. Since we cannot get along with them in peace and equality after giving them 400 years of our sweat and blood and receiving in return some of the worst treatment human beings have ever experienced, we believe our contributions to this land and the suffering forced upon us by white America justifies our demand for complete separation in a state or territory of our own. So that goes without question. It says that we should receive this reparations, and that California being the the centerpiece, so to speak, for everything that takes place in this country, even as far as Washington is concerned, should be the ones to take charge and represent this. But it is going to take the whole United States federal government to get behind this here. And that's what we want to share today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. Next speaker.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. My name is Akil Kashif El, and I just wrote a few things down I want to share. Let's see. We want redress for the constitutional wrongdoings that slavery, lynching, and Jim Crow played in our lives. The nature of the violation determines the scope of remedy. Equality for all under the law after reparations looks like a united republic of African American autonomous enclaves settled on 465,121,280 acres of land in the southern part of the United States. I want to go on to say that the classification of slaves by the courts and legislatures began as chattel property, then transmuted into real property. As slave labor increased, the courts and legislatures became less inclined to annex slaves to the lands as chattel. Slaves were then deemed transitory in real estate, allowing slaveholders to lease the slave's labor forever. And lastly, I want to say restitution, the transfer of the wrongdoer's gains to the victims, is an alternative to damages, the monetization of the victim's loss. The payment of group reparations creates the opportunity for institution building. Individual compensation cannot produce that. Compensation to African Americans for the injustice suffered must be sufficient. The guiding principles for reparations must be self-determination in every sphere of life where we are currently dependent. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Iris Peebles. I am a third-generation Californian. I guess technically a fourth-generation Californian because my great-grandmother did move here from Louisiana after my grandparents kind of settled in, and she ended up passing here. Actually, I wanted to start off by saying thank you. A very big special shout out to Dr. Brown. You probably don't remember, but about a year ago, my grandfather passed, and you were the pastor that presided over his ceremony. And you were the very first pastor my whole life that I heard talk about reparations and legacy. And that was super impactful. And I had no idea that you were the pastor that talked during my grandfather's funeral until I saw that the hearing was going to be here. And then I just took that as a sign that I had to show up. So I want to say thank you, because even before I knew that the task force was in the works, you were doing the work. Chairperson Moore, Chairwoman Moore, thank you for just showing up day in and day out. Just being on social media and seeing what a lot of the abuse that you've had to endure, I thank you for that. Dr. Lewis, thank you for showing everybody what allyship really is, and just open-mindedness, but also what intelligence is. It's really, really important, to do what's right. I think you said something like, justice delayed is not justice served. Or I know you said it way more eloquently. Thank you. Montgomery Steph, I don't know if I could see her, but I want to thank her because she always raises her hand. She's just like a very, very lovely voice for us. I want to say thank you, Senator Bradford. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I would like to implore all of the people to please remember that you are a representative of us, of people. We're not bots. We aren't just some random, thing on Twitter or something. We're not just, we're actually people. And those of us I happen to have traced my lineage to the 1600s, so it is not difficult. So I just would like to implore you to continue to represent us. You are not representatives of an organization like in Cobra or NARC or whatever. You are not a representative of people who are trying to sell trips to Ghana, for their own personal gain. You are representing the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments today. Next speaker.
Good morning, Chris Larson, Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. I'm speaking on my own terms. I actually had some remarks prepared, but sometimes you just got to speak from the heart, really. And I want to first say thank you to Chair Moore. I want to wish you a happy birthday, actually, too. Today is your birthday. This young woman is 30 years old today. Thank you. We are blessed. We are blessed to have a young Black millennial, powerful, strong force for reparations leading. Listen, we're gonna get reparations. We're gonna get reparations. Okay. I also want to thank y'all for voting in favor of lineage-based reparations eligibility last month. I know it was tough. But it was the right thing to do. Thank you so much. I want to get to some business here real quick. So I want to actually express some opposition, actually, to Assembly Bill 2296, which was introduced by one of your colleagues, Assemblymember Reginald Jones Sawyer, without telling y'all. That bill would extend the term of the task force by 1 year. You have had no public discussion on it. You have had no public conversations on it. He didn't bring it up in any of these meetings. He didn't tell y'all, and that's wrong. We are in 100% opposition to extending the term of this task force. 2 years is enough. Lastly, I know y'all gonna talk about the communications. I know you're gonna talk about the community engagement. I wanna raise some displeasure here with the performance of the two communications firms. I just got to keep it real. I just got to keep it business with y'all. The performance of the communications firms has been subpar, and I want to encourage us to find additional communications firms to step in and get this word out to the community. That's my 1 minute mark. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comments. Next speaker, please.
Good morning. My name is John William Templeton. I'm author of Our Roots Run Deep, Black Experience in California, Volumes 1 through 4, and a trilogy on the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Okay. Good morning. I'm John William Templeton. I'm the author of Our Roots Run Deep, Black Experience in California, Volumes 1 through 4, and a trilogy on the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. It's always a good idea to second Dr. Brown. And in his remarks, he alluded to 2 of the 3 African-American churches that were founded here in 1852 in response to the Right of Testimony Act and the Franchise Act, which took away the right to testify and the right to vote for African Americans in the Golden State, where only 4 years earlier, the last 2 governors under Mexican rule had been African American. So one of the first steps that needs to happen is to actually make the history of not only California, but the entire country known, not only to the general population, but also in our educational system. And I believe you have a session coming up to talk about that. Because these 3 churches are the example for how to craft a message that works for the entire community. As he mentioned, Thomas Starr King came out here in 1860 to be pastor of First Unitarian Universalist, spoke at all 3 of the Black churches, and also at the Prince Hall Lodges here. And it was the intervention of the Black churches with their white allies that led to Abraham Lincoln changing his mind and moving forward with the Emancipation Proclamation. So first, we got to learn the history. On April 23rd, we've got a session on how to do equity, the science of fairness, and we'll be talking to Tamam Tracy Moncour, who was the leader of the United San Francisco Freedom Movement. Look forward to engaging with you further.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good morning. My name is Josiah Williams. I wanted to start off by saying, I am the dream and hope of a slave, Maya Angelou. And by saying that, I mean, as a descendant, was dedicated to community uplift rather than personal ascension. I wanted to give thanks to the chair, Chair Moore, for all you're doing and being dedicated for our people, and also thanks to all of the task force members that voted for lineage-based reparations. You avoided, the challenges of lineage phobia, ethnocide, and erasure by basically coming up, with the decision to stand with the people. I also wanted to express that I'm also in opposition to AB 2296. We don't need any more time. We waited 400 years already. We don't need any additional time. And then also the comms team, we shouldn't hear more about a slap more than community uplift. Like, everybody knows about one event that affected 2 people, but our whole community has been going through this for years. And so we need to have comms team that's going to make sure people know about their own repair. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Darlene Crumity, and I am also a member of the Coalition for Just and Equitable. I am also a member of the Coalition for Just and Equitable California, but I am speaking privately today. It is a privilege and an honor for me to stand here in front of this commission in San Francisco, the city that I love, but also the city that has closed its door to me. To Reverend Brown, thank you for being a pillar of Black San Francisco and for joining this contemporary reparations movement. San Francisco is not the place of my birth. That would be Los Angeles. But you asked, how did I get here? I could tell you that in 1962, my mother, her 2 siblings and offsprings, and my grandmother moved to San Francisco, and we lived at 1681 Haight Street. I could tell you of my wonderful childhood running up and down the streets of San Francisco during the hippie movements. I could tell you that I was a part of the 1966 pilot plan for busing that took me out of Dudley Stone and transferred me to Lawton Elementary School, miles away from my home, which at the time was 1781 Haight Street. Or I could tell you that as an adult, when I tried to return to San Francisco, my application was rejected by the physical walls of gentrification that told me that I need not apply. But really, my story begins with my maternal grandmother, great-grandmother, Zori Dupree, born in 1836, a free woman of color from Culverton, Louisiana, who at the time purchased an enslaved Black man, Dupree R. Rose, who was born in 1820 and was living in the Dyson Plantation. They later married. From this union, their son, Nathaniel Rose, was born in 1870 and married Lottie, who was born in 1867. This union produced my grandmother, Florida Butler, born in 1904 in Culverton, Louisiana, but was raised in Mississippi. In 1918, my grandmother was part of the first wave of the Great Migration, also known as the World War I migration, according to Isabel Wilkerson in her phenomenal book, The Warmth of Other Suns. She migrated to Los Angeles, where she raised her 8 children, my mother being her 6th, who turned 88 this past April the 4th. I asked my grandmother and her offspring children, they still live in the greater part of Los Angeles area and beyond. I asked this commission to employ California to train and hire genealogists to research and put together the documents needed on the behalf of applicants of reparations, so they may also know their stories of their ancestors and qualify for reparations. For my family that has transitioned,
I'm
for
sorry.
those that are still
I'm
present,
so
and for
sorry to cut you
generations,
off. Excuse me.
I would like to thank Chair Moore for her excellent leadership and management of the task force, Vice Chair Brown, Javon Scott Lewis, Member Monica Montgomery, and Member Bradford for voting for the lineage-based reparations that would ensure that my family and others would not be erased.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. My name is Ramel Lamar L. I'm a seventh descendant, if you will, of what you would call, captured Africans who were caught in maybe as prisoners of war or something like that. But I'm actually speaking in a somewhat formal capacity on behalf of the Moorish Divine National Movement in North America, where I serve as part of my missionary work as a Grand Sheik and Chairman of Moorish Science Temple, California, and also Assistant Grand Governor of the 7th District of the Moorish Divine National Movement, which includes California, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, etc. And if it's okay, I would like to read Act 6 of our Divine Constitution and Bylaws. And what it says is Act 6, with us, all members must proclaim their nationality, and we are teaching our people their nationality and their divine creed, that they may know that they are a part and a partial of this said government, and know that they are not Negroes, colored folks, Black people, or Ethiopians, because these names were given to slaves by slaveholders in 1779 and lasted until 1865 during the time of slavery. But this is a new era of time now, and all men now must proclaim their free national name to be recognized by the government in which they live and the nations of the earth. This is the reason why Allah, the great God of the universe, ordained Noble Drew Ali the prophet to redeem his people from their sinful ways. The Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites who inhabited the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. Thank you. The only other thing I will add to that is that I'm proud to say, 1 minute? Oh yeah, I graduated from San Francisco State. While I was at San Francisco State, I had the duty and the privilege of also graduating in the class of 2001 School of African Philosophy as taught by Marcus Garvey. And I'm also an educator, so my duty is to teach African philosophy in the community, and this is part of our work. So I'm looking forward to, in any capacity, assisting on behalf of the Moorish Divine National Movement, on behalf of the Moorish Science Temple of America, on behalf of the original School of African Philosophy taught by Marcus Garvey in 1937. Also want to give honors to Temple One Hannibal Lodge. Also want to give a recognition to my cousin that still got the house around the corner, because my family been traveling to and fro in this particular church. I'm one of the descendants who came from LA and came up here, but half of us is in the southern part, some of us is in the northern part. So Jalahu, Islam.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Robert Reed, and my statement is, I have a superb lack of confidence in the task force being able to accomplish the goal it was created to undertake. If I am to believe that this is a serious effort, I call upon Governor Newsom, Attorney General Bonta, and Secretary Weber to remove those hostile to lineage-based reparations and install those who are more in line with the mission of Ms. Weber. These names can include UCLA-trained lawyer and co-founder of ADOS, Antonio Moore, organizer and co-founder of NAASD, Chad Brown. You guys have already allowed Chris Lodgson to speak, or Angela Nirvana, who time and time again has shown a commitment to the task force through her monthly public statements. I also want to make clear that when we're talking about reparations, we're talking about two prongs of attack. Reparations is one, simply to be a payment for a debt that is owed. harms that have been experienced by a select group of people. However, reparations should be accompanied by a Black agenda that tries to mitigate and establish ways for Black people to receive redress for current and standing harms. Reparations should not be about a flat Black engine where ADOS people are flattened into Blackness with people who just got here yesterday, this year, or 2 years ago. 2 years ago, it's lineage-based repair for experiences that people of a select ethnic group, those who descend from American chattel slavery, have experienced. And then also, I kind of want to touch on a subject that didn't really strike me until I got here, and that is the parking. So we choose San Francisco with some of the worst parking on this side of the Western Seaboard on a day that there is street sweeping. So how can the public be engaged when every 2 hours they have to worry about moving their car? If the devil is in the details, then we should have chosen a place with a parking structure, paid or not, or some kind of parking lot, or set aside some parking where people who want to come to these community meetings can feel free to do so and not have to worry about getting towed or getting tickets. That's absolutely shameful.
Next speaker.
Good morning, Dr. Amos Brown and the Reparations Task Force. My name is Nancy Harvey, and I'm a member of Allen Temple Baptist Church. But in addition to that, I'm a child care provider from Oakland, specifically the West Oakland community, which traditionally was an African-American community. I've been a child care provider for over 18 years. However, prior to being a child care provider, I was an elementary school teacher in which I taught kindergarten through 2nd grade in the private school sector. While teaching kindergarten, I witnessed firsthand how many of our African-American 5-year-old children were not able to pass the private school's entrance exam into kindergarten. Shortly afterwards, I decided to make a difference in my community by opening up my daycare, having a goal of academically preparing infants to 4-year-olds for their next level of education. Over the course of my 18 years of being a provider, I have experienced financial hardship due to the subsidized rates that providers are paid by the state of California. I didn't realize what a financial hardship it was going to be for my own family as I set out to help my community, the one that I was raised up in. Historically, Black providers were excluded from collective bargaining and from wage and hour laws in the 1920s because white senators did not want to give fair pay to former slaves. Perhaps in their eyes, Black women were merely meant to continue the cycle of being the slave master's wet nurses, which meant allowing the slave master's children to nurse from the female slave's breast, assisting their child to grow strong, but compromising the slave's child. This was not a paid position. It was a forced position. Fast forward to the year 2022, what does our research tell us about our African-American child care providers? Well, let me tell you, we still see a system that continues to devalue the very people that keep California working. Providers are paid low wages, no health care benefits, no retirement plan, and yes, just like our ancestors who were slaves. Black providers have not had a fair shot at building wealth, and the entire child care industry pay and standards have been rooted in this racist history, keeping all early educators' pay extremely low, not a livable wage. All child care providers receive low wages. However, African-American staff earn 78 cents on the dollar of white educators, leaving them not only financially deprived, but morally dehumanized. If providers are fortunate to have a home, Once they physically can no longer do the job, we have seen where many have been forced to take out a reverse mortgage. And when
Excuse me.
once,
I'm so sorry.
Oh.
Your time
all
is
right,
up.
thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
must change this system. We're counting on you all to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, this is our last speaker.
I'm Grady L. Leatherman Bay, and I'm on behalf to speak to our global problem. And it's a human problem. And when we deal with etymology, we deal with human, which means color. And color is an adjective, not a nationality. But if you should look up the word black or more, you will find in context in science that we are Moors. Now, this goes back to the beginning of 1724 under the Black Codes. Property can't own property. After the Civil War, we were all indentured into servitude after 1871 under the act after they murdered Abraham Lincoln, and Andrew Johnson would not do the bid, so they impeached him and put a military coup in. And ever since then, through every state, through 1870, there's been a military coup. So what we have to do now is called Make Ready. Make Ready deals with a convention, which was actually called the Climate Change Paris Agreement, which started in 1873, the original Paris Agreement. Now, if you do your study, you'll find that Donald Trump signed the Treaty of Marrakesh. Then he signed the Treaty of Marrakesh Implementation Act. Go back to the Treaty of Marrakesh and put in 1787, and you will find that is the Moroccan-American Friendship Treaty, because we're Moors. And under that, we've been recognized under the empire and started the contract with the United States in 1790, because 1787 is prior to 1790. So now the reparation has to come ready-made. It has to deal with a successor agency, a mechanism that we can move international shipping. In the beginning, Noah was on an ark in a ship with his family, and they were doing trade. So the ships aren't moving because of the Brexit, which is the corona, which started from King James. The crown was unified under King James. So we're gonna have to start taking up the attributes of the shipping and merchantmen, which was in the book of Ruth in Genesis, that was talking about the trade of Bethlehem, Judah, and the Moors. Now there's much more to this, but I'm just scratching the surface. But this is the provincial government that we need to have. It'll be under climate change. I have the agreements, and I'm a community advocate. I look forward to sitting down and engaging with you in a matrimonial contract.
Thank you for your comments. That concludes the in-person portion of the public comments this morning, and now we will turn to the call-in commenters who are waiting in the queue. Sean, I'm getting ready to, if you can get the callers ready, I will go over the instructions.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to make a public comment over the phone, please press 1 and 0 at this time. You'll hear acknowledgement that you've been placed in queue. Now press 1 then 0 a second time. You'll be removed from the queue. One moment, please, while we wait for our first comment.
Okay. Good morning, call-in commenters. My name is Aisha Martin Walton, and I'm with the Department of Justice. Public comment period will be for 30 minutes. You will have 3 minutes to speak. Please be advised that in fairness to everyone, at the 3-minute mark, you may be politely interrupted. However, please know that there is a public comment period during each meeting, and the task force encourages you to participate. You may also always submit written comments at any time via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. Hey, Sean, I think we're ready for our first caller.
Yes, our first comment will come from line number 16. Please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Keisha Nsewi, and I'm the Vice President of Mount Diablo Unified School District Board of Trustees. But today I am here as a co-founder of Black Californians United for Early Care and Education. BCUECE is a powerful coalition of advocates, policy influencers, civil rights organizations, researchers, nonprofit, early educators, families, and community-based organizations. As BCUECE members, we have intentionally organized our influence around a 10-point policy plan to serve the nearly 500,000 Black children and students in California. Knowing everyday Black children lack equitable opportunities to thrive academically and socially, yesterday is already too late and tomorrow is not soon enough. California's policy and resource choices have since created and tolerated the following conditions. The median income of Black workers is $14,000 less than white and Asian workers, and Black life expectancy has decreased by 1.5 years. Black children experience some of the highest rates of poverty. 2 out of 3 Black children who are eligible for child care subsidies don't receive it. Among early educators, already an underpaid workforce, Black educators are paid less than their white counterparts, resulting in poverty rates 3 times that of all other workers. Therefore, we demand a Black, whole child, whole family, whole ECE workforce, and whole community approach. We will no longer tolerate a generalized approach to the needs of Black ECE constituents. We want to ensure our community needs are seen beyond a deficit lens and extracted from current initiatives that assume they are addressing the needs of Black people. This includes examining and addressing how California's systems and policies entrench inequities, resulting in the overrepresentation of Black children and families who are system impacted, and Black workforce and communities experiencing poverty due to a lack of intentional investment. The continuation of a one-size-fits-all model perpetuates the failure to identify specific policy approaches, levers, and fiscal resources to disrupt institutional harm to California's Black communities, starting with our children. We demand a shift that results in California using policies and resources to in its structures while also investing in, affirming, and advancing the cultural assets of Black people. We want Black children to receive an additional $500 in their CalKids account. We want basic universal income for Black families, especially women and mothers. We want Black early educators to receive stipend payments to address the racial wage gap. We want you to pass reparations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, go to line number 33. Please go ahead.
This is Chad Brown with CJEC and NAASD LA. Hello, Chair Moore, and a very happy birthday to you. We celebrate you today and every day. Good morning to you and to all members of the task force. It's so exciting to see you all together in the same space for the first time. I wish I could be there with you, but I'm happy to see volunteer members from CJEC present in the room. Many of them came a long way to be with you today, which only speaks to the long-standing and unwavering commitment of our community to be involved in this historically important process. I want to start by thanking the 5 members who voted yes to lineage-based reparations at the last meeting. Chair Moore, Vice Chair Brown, Member Scott Lewis, Member Montgomery Stepp, and Senator Bradford, thank you. You stood tall for the Freedmen community last month. We see you, we appreciate you, and we continue to support you. Your votes pushed our people closer to realizing America's long-deferred promise of economic justice, and it will not be forgotten. To the members who voted no to lineage last month, the task force has made a decision which binds you all, and I sincerely hope you have had time to reflect and will be able to move forward with integrity and enthusiasm. There is still much work to do. Today, I wanted to speak about several concerns we have with the actions of certain members. Many of you are now aware that Member Joan Sawyer has introduced a bill in the State Assembly to extend the end date of the task force for 1 year. This was done without consulting his fellow task force members or any of the activists and organizers who have been working on AB 3121 prior to his involvement. He has also not yet spoken about this bill publicly. We want to express our strong opposition to AB 2296, as 2 years is certainly enough time to complete the task force statutory duties. Next, I want to inform Member Joan Sawyer that we took note of his claim that he authored AB 3121. That is not true. Again, we have been working on AB 3121 before it was a bill, and while we appreciate Mr. Joan Sawyer's support as a co-sponsor, he is not responsible for any of the language that appears in the bill. That credit goes to Dr. Shirley Weber and the grassroots activists who have been working on the legislation. I also want to express my own personal offense and anger at Mr. Joan Sawyer's comment last month that some Black people came over in slave ships, others came over in cruise ships, but we're all in the same boat now. I can't think of anything more offensive to say to the Black American community, the descendants of those who were enslaved and built this nation despite being subjected to the most heinous of atrocities. I believe he owes us all an apology. Lastly, I want to commend Chair Moore for bringing attention to the poor performance of the contracted communications firms, Young Communications and AB Partners. My understanding is that these firms have been paid upwards of $1 million, and yet they are woefully delinquent on contracted deliverables to the point of dereliction. To date, there has been little to no communication support provided by these firms to the Black grassroots organizers and media. It is critically important that the task force engage firms that are vested in our economic justice and able to provide the required services. I believe these firms should be replaced and their payments refunded.
I'm sorry to
Ultimately, I look
interrupt
forward to
you in
seeing
the middle
drastic
of your
improvement in this
sentence,
area.
but your
Thank
time
you
is
all
up.
again for your service to the Freedmen community, and I'm
Thank
wishing
you
you
so
all a
much.
productive meeting today, and I'm looking forward to today's session.
Our next speaker.
Next, go to line number 23. Please go ahead.
Peace and reparations. I am Friday Jones. My name is Consa Jones Muhammad, and I am co-chair of the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants and a founding member of the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. I was also appointed by Mayor Garcetti to the Reparations Advisory Commission for the City of Los Angeles, and today I'm speaking as an individual. In February, as part of my public testimony, I said that it was not the time to re-enter the descendant community. Chair Moore, Vice Chair Brown, Member Scott Lewis, and Member Seth, thank you for not wavering. Thank you for hearing us and seeing us. Someone said that the electrical troubles from last month were the ancestors showing up. I want to hold space for my seventh generation grandmother, great-grandmother Tracy of the Bamileke people from the Congo Nation, sold into slavery at the age of 17 on July 1st, 1779, and her daughter Katie, born into slavery around 1802 in Jenkinsville, South Carolina. I want to recognize the United Martin family. I also want to recognize my great-grandmother Mary Jane Jones, born in 1905, who died at the age of 107 in 2012, and her great-aunt Zippley Smith. Zippley and her sister, my great-grandmother's grandmother, we do not know her name. We have not yet uncovered where they were from, but they did not speak English and were enslaved by the Smith family of Roanoke, North Carolina. I want to recognize my great-grandmother's mother, Jane Jones, and father, Samuel Jones. Jane died of gangrene, a treatable wound, because white doctors did not treat her. There are many family members I want to recognize, and for this time, I will not call their names, but they are buried in Mary's Chapel, North Carolina, Scotland Neck, North Carolina, a church founded by a former enslaved woman, Mary Barnes. In your Centering the Descendants of the U.S. Chattel Slavery in California's Lineage Page Repair, you not only see those of us here in the flesh today, you see our ancestors and offer healing not just to them, but to this nation in your leadership on how this nation has to make the repair. So again, Camilla Moore, Jovan Scott Lewis, Dr. Amos Brown, Monica Montgomery Stepp, and Senator Stephen Bradford, thank you for seeing us. We have asked that California consider the Department of Freedmen Affairs to continuously manage the affairs of the descendants and freedmen community. We have asked the state to disaggregate how it collects data on the descendants, and we have asked for protected class status. This body has the ability to make those recommendations a reality. I will close with a quote from Jovan Scott Lewis: to be recognized as a people from a place with a heritage is foundational to liberation. Thank you all so much. Peace and reparations.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to go to line number 9. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Moore, Vice Chair Brown, and task force members. This is Marcus Champion with NAASD, LA, and CJAC. My comment today is centered on Member Reggie Jones-Sawyer and the peculiar statements and decisions he has made up to this point in the process. I can't help but think that Mr. Jones-Sawyer has an agenda, and it seemed to reveal itself in the wake of the eligibility vote at the last meeting and evolved into an all-out tantrum after the decision on the lineage standard did not go his way. I heard the member make a statement along the lines of some Black folks came over in slave ships, some in cruise ships, but we are all in the same boat now. That statement is fully disrespectful to the identity of Black Americans and our ancestors. Member Jones Sawyer would never go to Belize or Jamaica and insert such a daft and insensitive comment into their politics. If this were any other ethnic group he talked about in such a dismissive manner, his removal from this body would be the conversation which I am suggesting it should. In addition to this, Mr. Jones Sawyer has introduced legislation to extend the task force another year, AB 2296, and did so without making his fellow task force members aware or talking about it before the public at one of the hearings. The reasoning behind the extension makes no sense, as he stated in a TV interview, is to educate the public on what the task force has done. Extending this body and continuing to be constrained by Bagley team doesn't appear to be sound decision-making if education is the goal. Again, what ulterior motive does Mr. Jones Sawyer have? Mr. Jones Sawyer also claimed authorship of AB 3121. That was a false statement. As I testified to myself and my team's involvement with AB 3121, I, Marcus Champion, can claim co-authorship as we contributed to amendments. Mr. Jones Sawyer should stick to claiming co-sponsorship, seeing as how he was unaware of the actual language of the bill, as well as Dr. Weber's legislative intent. He also was unaware of the disaggregation language for African Americans in AB 1604 when he actually voted on the previous iteration, AB 105. Finally, I want to highlight the disgusting bullying that I saw Mr. Jones Sawyer perpetrate on Chair Moore. Chair Moore has conducted herself with the utmost level of professionalism and expertise in leading this body. To see a veteran politician throw a tantrum and lamely attempt to overtalk and bully Chair Moore because the vote did not go his way had me floored as a Black man. Jones Sawyer should be ashamed of his actions. Even in disagreement, as an older Black man, he should never treat a Black woman this way who is doing her best to help facilitate justice for the African American descendants of chattel slavery, let alone any younger generations who represent the evolution of Black politics. This was a missed opportunity and a poor example of leadership on Jones Sawyer's part. We are here for reparations. Write a new bill if your goal is to end racism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to line number 34. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Regina Brown Wilson, and I'm the Executive Director of California Black Media. I have two things that I wanted to talk about. One is the audio. I just want to make sure, one, that you all can hear me, but I want you to know that someone at lunch should probably check it because it is horrible for anybody else who is actually listening on the, as I am, watching on my computer and obviously now listening to the phone. Two, I wanted to just bring about an issue of concern, whereas I believe that the task force may have missed an opportunity to talk about how media, the fourth estate media, plays a role in reparations. And so I don't know if it's too late for that conversation to continue to happen, but as we talk about the communications contract, California Black Media has been the only media partnership of Black media throughout the state who has been covering this task force from day one through the lens of Antonio Ray Harvey, who's been disseminating this information out to all the over 30 Black media outlets throughout the state. I know that the media landscape is very tricky right now, but I want to implore the commission to kind of really think about how it can better connect with the media and the community, but also understanding that we have a media infrastructure right now that is fractured on many levels. And while I applaud Dr. Grills for being able to raise $1 million to create the contract, I think it's not nearly enough what you need to really actually inform and engage the entire populace, not just the Black community, but others who you will need support from. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to line number 15. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jolene Cook, and first of all, I want to commend you, Chair Moore, and thank you for your diligence in ensuring participation. It has been very difficult to follow your platforms, especially if you didn't want to download the Blue Jean app or whatever. And like I said, echoing the comments from others here that are participating both on the phone and online, and we could better. So I just want to encourage you to make the communication folks accountable and also, have a real communication plan that allows this information to get to our community so that we can participate and use our voice. Like I said on our last meeting, I'm a first-generation college student. I'm a fourth generation native of Berkeley. And this conversation needs to happen because although I moved out of the state to get my education, I can't afford to live in my home. Now that I've returned home and I'm taking care of my elders, there are some basic essentials, housing, their medical, medical requirements of generations of property owners, of, folks who have worked their entire lives serving other people and now do not have the dignity to live a decent life after they've given everything that they have. This is, especially critical in our elder communities that are here, that are dying off. We're trying to find solutions, and this conversation, like I said, it should have happened a long time ago. The same way the slave owners were compensated for their slaves is the same way that we need to be compensated for everything that we've lost. Through eminent domain, through red line. I do want to press on the communication portion of this because I haven't seen any information. I'm publicizing because I want people to participate. I've not seen, I've seen a newsreel here or there, but this is a conversation that is critical to our community. And I was a student of Dr. Shirley Weber, and she taught us to use our voice. It was a state school, but to also continue to move forward for justice and to do the right thing. So thank you to the task force for your work and your diligence. And I'm still looking for information on genealogy, all the things that could help us once reparations are actually, awarded, that could help us to educate us on what the next actions are for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, go to line number 37. Please go ahead.
Good morning, task force members. My name is Ernest Russell, and I'm calling in because I want to basically back the statements that were made by Chad Brown, Friday Jones, and Marcus Champion as it relates to the descendant community, as well as, I'll say concerns that we have with previous comments made by certain task force members after the vote was made for lineage-based reparations. Society tells us that we have to work hard to get where we want to be. They say we have to value education and support our community and commit to building if we want to succeed. Well, if this was even remotely true, one would have to inform the descendant of slave community why they haven't been able to achieve or obtain the social upward mobility that every other group in America has been able to achieve. The truth is that the racial wealth gap is a mirror of the social gaps in American society, and it has reflected as we've moved throughout this timeline. Every day, the return on investment from the institution of slavery and other institutions that have benefited off the backs of Blacks have continued to compound interest daily. One can say that since the end of slavery in America, white Americans and other groups have reaped the privileges of that institution, while Black Americans and the ex-Negro have only been left to deal with the consequences of it. In 1964, Martin Luther King wrote in his book, Why We Can't Wait, that he specifically repudiated the Reagan and Reynolds approach. Whenever the issue of compensatory or preferential treatment for the Negro is raised, Dr. King wrote, some of our friends recoil in horror. The Negro should be granted equality, they agree, but he should ask for nothing more. On the surface, this appears reasonable, but it is not realistic. For it is obvious that if a man is entered at the starting line in a race 300 years after another man, the first would have to perform some impossible feat in order to catch up with his fellow runners. I just want the task force in the public to really take this comment or that quote into mind and realize that when we're looking at other Black ethnic groups, they're not all starting 300 years after the starting line. that's for a specific Black ethnic group here in America. And I would, by and large, advocate for lineage-based reparations when we consider that fact. Now, the last statement that I would like to make is in alignment with what Friday Jones said in relation to Jovan Lewis's comments. We recognize that the people with the heritage is the foundation for liberation. As a true descendant, I agree with this statement wholeheartedly. And if you think about what was truly stripped from my people and from my family, it is our ethnic identity and our right to a history. To remedy this, you guys have to allow us agency to establish what was previously denied. And that's, the establishment of determining what our futures look like and what those histories say about our people, and specifically what we wanted and what we need. And with that said, I'm complete.
Thank you. Sean, if you could hold one moment, Chair Moore. It looks like we have 5 minutes left. Would you like to take the last 2 callers? All right. Sean, last 2 callers, please.
I apologize. Could you repeat that, please?
We'll take the next 2 callers.
Thank you. We're going to go to line number 38. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Task Force. I'm grateful for the declarations that was voted on. Now, it would be great to know about residency. I was brought here as a child with my sister and have struggled. I have been discriminated against. I have filed EEO and job discrimination and had housing issues. And in that EEO office, everybody looked like me. To me, that speaks volumes. This is a sanctuary state, open borders, and for the most part, you have to speak Spanish to be gainfully employed in some jobs here. My daughter left California last year to be gainfully employed in Seattle. She was employed before she even arrived there. What about her, for someone that had to leave? I hope that the ongoing actions of this task force gets that part right too, but also addresses that elephant in the room, which politicians don't want to talk about. It seems to be considered taboo or something to address illegal immigration. And this affects here on everybody else. It has to be talked about in California. This task force does have to find a method of repair to this harm class. Although I am disappointed at what sometimes seems like stalling tactics. These reparations are not a cure-all for racism. It's not going to fix everything. Hopefully it can fix some of us here, but it won't. It's also not a slush fund for organizations to endlessly study for 10, 15, 20 years and get nowhere. That's not what this is about either. But we do have to focus in just California. There's issues here. And the sanctuary cities, the sanctuary states, the borders open, it definitely hurts people. It hurts people like me. It hurts a lot of us. And for those that are going to seek running for office again, if you're listening, voting is exchange. And you have to give to get. The time is over for identity politics. That's never worked for ADOS. It never has worked for us. We're tethered to the bottom in this country, in this caste system. Then last month, the caller spoke about getting stopped while Black. As triggering as that is, and I understand that's not what these reparations are about either. It's a death to harm people that need care. It's not about the emotion of getting stopped while Black. No one wants to talk about the civil rights bills and the immigration bills of '65. That was meant for ADOS. Unfortunately, we weren't disaggregated millennium against them. So now we suffer. Because if you go check a box for a slot in college or a diversity hire, no one asks you, are you a descendant of enslaved people or did you get here last month? All you do is just check that black box and you're in. That has hurt us here in this country. The number one minority in the country is considered a white woman. She's benefited the most from affirmative action. It has not been Black people, not been ADOS, not been freedom. And also, I second what I heard someone saying earlier.
I second to ask the DOJ to remove some of the task force members because I just don't feel like they have our best interests going on here. And I would say replace them. Replace with one person I know of, Antonio Moore, who's a California resident lawyer, one of the founders of the ADOS movement, and he testified
me.
on behalf of this AB
Excuse me.
3121.
Commenter, I'm so sorry to interrupt you in the middle of your sentence, but thank you so much for your comments today. Sean, this will be our last speaker of this morning. Sean? Can you?
Yes. One moment. We'll go to line number 26. Please go ahead.
Yes, my name is Yudette Hayes. I'm a professional law student, a member of Reparations United Front. My first comment I would like to make, we were in slavery and now we went into Jim Crow. I don't really think we're out of Jim Crow. We're just in a different kind of slavery. I also would like to ask that you control our language, not let the government tell us our names, our situations, our meetings. We need to control our language. He's not a master. He was a slave owner. I researched our family background. We have a German name, so our owner was a German. The other thing is, are we going to put a time limit on collecting data? We already know we have many people, doctors that have did the research. The history is there. It's all in print. And so we can move forward. We need time limits. Then we need checks and balances. As you know, anytime Black people get together to do improvement, there's always this white supremacy control system that will step in, infiltrate, and destroy within. So yes, I agree. We need checks and balances and to remove those who are not in favor of reparations. And last, I would like to say, my grandfather, I did a research on our family DNA. My father, 100% Nigerian. We farm land in Texas. Land was taken from my family, and a very wealthy person is on that land right now, the person that took that land away from my grandparents. So land is very important. I just hope that what I'm saying is getting across to everyone. Language is very important. We must control our language and have checks and balances and time limits so we can move forward. And remember, there's just much more that we need. I agree with one of the previous callers about our parents that went through all that. We don't even know what it's like to go through what they've been through to survive today so we could be here today. So we must fight for their legal representation as they get older. They should automatically have someone legally to look over, make sure that they're not being taken advantage of, make sure they have the care that they need. So it should be something that we could sign up for to legally put our parents in, that they would have representation, medication, and home care.
Thank you
or,
so much.
A facility care.
Excuse me for
anything that we would
interrupting
like
you.
to choose
Thank you so much for your
have
comments
that
today.
available for
And
our
that concludes our
elders.
public comments.
Thank you very much. Reparations now.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, today. This is our first in-person meeting, having public comment both in person and calling in. So thank you for your patience. Also, thank you because, as you know, public comment is at every meeting, but you can also provide written testimony at any time at Reparations Task Force at doj.ca.gov. So thank you again, and I will now turn the meeting back over to Chair Moore.
Thank you, Ms. Martin Walton. So the next item on our agenda is number 3, action item, approval of March meeting minutes. So the minutes from the March task force meeting were sent to task force members with the materials, and we've had a chance to review them. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections regarding the minutes? Hearing no questions, is there a motion to accept the minutes as presented or corrected?
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded that we adopt the minutes as presented. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, I'll turn to Parliamentarian Johnson. Your roll call.
Thank you, Chairman. I will begin calling the roll for the vote, beginning with the chair. Chair Moore.
Aye.
Chair Moore votes aye. Vice Chair Brown.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown votes aye. Member Bradford.
Aye.
Member Bradford votes aye. Member Grills.
Aye.
Member Grills votes aye. Member Holder. Member Jones Sawyer. Member Lewis.
Aye.
Member Lewis votes aye. Member Tamaki.
Aye.
Member Tamaki votes aye. Member Montgomery Steppe. Montgomery Steppe. And again, Member Jones Sawyer. Let the record also reflect that Member Bradford did come in shortly after we began. Madam Chair, there are currently 6 members present, and there were 6 ayes, and 1 member not voting, and that was who was present, and that was Member Jones Sawyer.
Thank you. So there were 6 ayes. Sorry.
No nays.
No nays. The ayes have it and the motion carries. The minutes are approved as presented. So we're going to move on towards our next agenda item. So our next agenda item is our first witness panel number 1, pre-K to 12th grade education institutions. So we have 3 panelists today who will be providing testimony. Some are here in person and some are remote. So the first person we'll hear from is Dorothy Hines. Dorothy Hines was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. Mrs. Hines graduated from Northern Illinois University with an AA degree in special education for the educable and textually disabled. While at NIU, she helped lay the foundation for the local chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, the second oldest sorority for African American women. She then joined the graduate chapter in Evanston, Illinois. After graduation, she moved to Santa Ana, California to work for the Santa Ana Unified School District. While there, she co-authored a district study guide for teachers to help them be more effective when working with African American students. Later, she helped move to San Jose, California, where she continued teaching until retirement in 2015. We'll then hear from Dr. Etta Hollins. Dr. Etta Hollins is Professor Emerita in the Division of Teacher Education and Curriculum Studies at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She is a member of the Council for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation Accreditation Council and is on the advisory boards for the National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering, the Salish Kootenai College Teacher Preparation Program, and EdTPA. In 2016, she received both the Outstanding Book Award from the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education and the Legacy Award from Division K of the American Educational Research Association. She was inducted as a fellow of AERA in 2018. And then last but not least, we'll hear from Maisie Chen. Maisie Chen is Executive Director, co-founder of CATER, Community Asset Development Redefining Education, an independent 300-member organization in South Los Angeles, California, led by African American and Latino parents of public school children. For 15 years, CATER parents have been organizing and building movement to end the school-to-prison pipeline, leading to seismic changes in school discipline in Los Angeles, California, and nationally. Maisie is a board member of the Schott Foundation for Public Education. Thank you, Dr. Hines, Dr. Hollins, and Ms. Chen. And without further ado, we'll turn to Dorothy Hines for your expert testimony when you're ready. Okay, so we'll move on to Dr. Hollins.
No, I'm Hines. Isn't this where I'm supposed to be? Oh, sorry.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Dr. Hines. We appreciate you being here, and you can begin your testimony when you're ready.
Actually, I do not have my doctor. So.
Oh, sorry.
Just plain Mrs. Hines.
Thank you, Ms.
And it
Hines.
is indeed an honor to be here today as part of the California Task Force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. I thank all of you for your work on this most important piece of legislation. I have been collecting articles, artifacts, and information about people of African descent since I was 10 years old. In addition, I have put up displays about people of African descent for public libraries, community events, schools, churches, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Delta Sigma Theta, and for special occasions such as Juneteenth and Kwanzaa in San Jose, Oakland, San Francisco, Livermore, Los Angeles, DeKalb, Illinois, and Washington, D.C. I am the great-granddaughter of 4 of the enslaved, and I have been to Ghana to see where I thought my ancestors originated. Since then, I have discovered through DNA testing that I am 38% Nigerian and 91% African. My personal dream is to establish an African American museum in Santa Clara County, and I also hope to help create the plan for reparations for the descendants of the enslaved. Although I personally believe that all people who are African Americans and living in the United States deserve reparations, because all people who are of the African descent are discriminated against through racism on an ongoing basis in this country. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to define some of the terms that I will be using. Instead of referring to people as white, I will be using the term European American, because by not doing so, it unconsciously sends the message that they are the only true Americans and that everyone else is an add-on in our society. I came to this conclusion after speaking with hundreds, if not thousands, of European Americans over the years about their political and social beliefs. I will also use the term African American rather than Black to describe people of African descent, because there's no geographical location with the designation of Black. Words matter as to how people and others feel about themselves and how their history is recorded. So what is the backstory? I know that a background history of which groups have received an apology from the government or reparations, and how it was done, and the history of slavery and discrimination is in order. Knowing and understanding the backstory makes it much easier to discuss what must be addressed going forward. The task we have set before us is an arduous one because it hasn't been done before. Many older records were either not kept or were destroyed intentionally or through forces of Mother Nature. There's a general lack of information among African Americans about our history when it pertains to which plantation on which our ancestors lived, because many times the families didn't pass down the information or it wasn't considered relevant by the younger generations. With each family's generational move away from slavery, more of the history gets lost. Although there is a new interest in genealogy, now that DNA testing is available to the general public, and public records can also be accessed online. Having said all of that, doing the research for reparations for African American slavery is not an impossible task in this day and age of DNA and computer technology. Reparations for African Americans for the horrors of slavery and Jim Crow is something that is long overdue, and I am confident that with persistence, it can become a reality. I need to mention what has happened with two other non-European groups where the government has tried to make reparations. The first group is the Native American. In 1928, the Merriam Report was the first government study to show with extensive data that their policies toward Native Americans resulted in social injustice to Native Americans. Since then, there have been a series of treaties where the government has agreed to pay Native American tribes for the oil and mineral rights on their reservations. In 1979, Florida began paying Seminole Native Americans for monies brought in for casinos, bingo halls, and other gaming operations. In 1988, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was created to regulate the 573 recognized tribes' gaming operations in the United States, of which 72 tribes disperse money to their members, and the government receives 10 to 20% of the revenue. The second group is the Japanese American, who were rounded up with the help of the census information and sent to concentration camps like Nanzanar and Tule Lake. Meticulous records were kept by the government. In 1988, President Reagan apologized for their internment and authorized $20,000 to be given to each internee who was still alive. This comes out to about $47,965.51 in today's money. They were interred for 4 years. The treatment of those of African descent was much harsher and for a much longer time than that of Japanese Americans. This is not about who was treated better or worse than someone else. It is about paying reparations to those who have the legacy of slavery. Nothing in my mind compares with the horrors of slavery over the centuries and the hostilities of Jim Crow and the ensuing discrimination by de jure, the law, and de facto, the custom but not the law. The legacy of slavery still affects every person of African descent in our country today. Under President Lincoln, slavery officially ended in 1865, after 246 years of forced servitude of those of African descent. The earliest presence of people of African descent occurred with the Spanish when they began relying on the forced labor of Native Americans and Africans in the 16th century in what is now California. Later, there was a divide between the pro-slavery Southerners, the anti-slavery Northerners, and the Free Soil Party, which opposed slavery on a moral basis, but they wanted to eliminate competition from African American, later both free and enslaved. In 1850, California was ratified as a free state, forbidding slavery and indentured servitude. However, California created legal structures that allowed slave-owning European Americans who migrated from the Midwest and the South to retain ownership of African Americans. When California joined the Union, there was a compromise that included the Fugitive Slave Act that required enslaved fugitives to be returned to their enslavers when captured. Once California became a state, then laws were passed that forbid non-Europeans from testifying against Europeans, both in civil and criminal court cases. So California had free, but not equal people of African descent, as well as enslaved people, and there were those who were held involuntarily as indentured servants. Immediately following the Civil War, California passed laws limiting where non-Europeans could live, own property, vote, marry, be buried, work, eat, travel, etc. California was no more or less racist or progressive than the Deep South, and with that came the Ku Klux Klan. They terrorized African Americans in places like Bakersfield and Orange County. Now I will address some of the challenges that will probably occur, but can be overcome. Part of the problem with identifying who was an early enslaved African American is a dearth of records in some areas, or not knowing where to look for the information. Because of discrimination, many older Americans were denied access to hospitals and were born at home. For example, I am the first person on both sides of my family to be born in a hospital, so many records are missing. Prior to the advent of computers, official documents were kept at county courthouse records. If a courthouse was destroyed by fire or natural disaster, all of the records would be lost, as it was in my father's case in Kentucky. If this information that we are seeking is not available in the county courthouse records, then we will have to look elsewhere. Computers and printers did not come into vogue until about 1983. With many hospitals not admitting African Americans, birth certificates often didn't get reported, and people did so only when they had the money to pay for them. Sometimes names were misspelled because the person doing the reporting was not well educated and spelled names the way that they sounded. This was the case with my husband when his aunts gave his incorrect name to the hospital staff where he was born. If this occurs, you have to look for alternative spellings of names. Census reports are not made available to the public for 70 years. And last but not least, there is a tendency for African Americans in general not to trust the government. Now for the recommendations as to how California can go about giving reparations to those whose ancestors were enslaved. We must first acknowledge that not everyone whose ancestors were enslaved is living their life as an African American. I have newly discovered European American cousins who have lived their lives for at least three generations, not as African Americans, but as European Americans, because their white skin made passing much easier for them and their families. My personal belief is that the people included in reparations should have lived their lives as African Americans, as evidenced by documentation. Second, we must also acknowledge that not every person with dark skin is a descendant of an enslaved person. There are immigrants from all over the world who look like African Americans, but in fact, whose ancestors were not enslaved in the United States. There are those whose enslaved ancestors fled to places like Belize and Mexico and Canada to escape slavery in the United States. And we must determine if their descendants should be considered. I believe that they should be considered in the reparations. Third, we have the foreigner residents of the United States who are currently living abroad with or without current American citizenship. I believe they should be given reparations as the descendants of the enslaved. In other words, I would rather err on the side of inclusiveness rather than exclusiveness. So how do we begin? The reparations to African Americans is a very important step in the healing process, even though discrimination and racism still flourish. We should plan to devote up to 3 years for the gathering of information, although disbursement of funds could begin within the first year as documentation is verified. We should begin by having public service announcements as to what is about to occur and why. These announcements would be in all forms of media, such as TV, streaming services, movie theaters, print newspapers, and magazines, as well as electronic and social media sites and billboards. Once a person has been verified as being an African American and living their life as an African American, then the research team must go to work proving that that person is the descendant of an enslaved person. The process should not be too complicated for the identification of who is or isn't an African American. We should allow for non-governmental records to be accepted, such as family Bibles, letters, DNA companies, family stories, church records, social and civic affiliation records. The next step is much more complicated and involved because most African Americans are not aware of the plantation where their ancestors lived. They may know the state, but not necessarily the county or plantation. This is especially true of families which have lived in the North or West for 3 or more generations, or those whose families moved several times because they feared for their lives, or those who were enslaved in large cities. Census records should be checked beginning in 1870 and working backwards for terms such as African, Blackamoor, colored, Negro with a small n, Negro with a capital N, Black with a small b, Black with a capital B, Afro, African American, as well as any derogatory terms. Using the list of the ancestral family members, we should start at their estimated age at the 1860 census. There should be a determination of which European American families in the neighborhood owned slaves in 1860 by looking at that county's 1860 slave schedule. The neighborhood where the ancestors lived in 1870 has to be checked for European American families with the same surnames as African Americans.
Ms. Hines, you have 5 minutes.
I'm almost finished. Thank you. Essential is the comparison of the ages of the ancestors' 1860 family group with the enslaved ages in the household slave schedule. The slaveholding candidates must be prioritized into 3 categories, consisting of 1, the likely candidates, the ages of the ancestors fit into the 1860 slave schedule. 2, the less likely candidates, the ages don't appear to match. And 3, the least likely candidates, the ancestors are not listed in either the 1860 or 1870 census. If there is enough evidence to suggest further investigation, then the European American family would need to be researched. This process would have to be repeated for the 1850 slave schedule as well. Then you need to eliminate the non-enslaved African American. The Registrar of Free Colored Persons of 1840 to 1864 would have to be cross-referenced. In addition to all of the previously mentioned items, original records would have to be checked. Original records include Bible records, church records, court records, District of Columbia records, the Freedmen's Bureau, fugitive slave cases, funeral homes, historical society records, hospital records, land and property records, all of the previous Confederate slave payrolls from 1862 to 1865. Original records also include newspapers, obituaries, occupations, online records, oral history, periodicals, plantation records, prison and penitentiary records, probate records, slavery and bondage records, Social Security records, and death index records, Southern Claims Commission, taxation records, vital records, and wills. By using the resources above, any contested identification should be able to be verified as to whether a person is an African American of the formerly enslaved. I hope that this information has been valuable, and thank you for working on this very important issue. That's my conclusion.
Thank you, Ms. Hines.
Oh, wait a second, I forgot something. I'm sorry. I forgot something. In conclusion, my hope is that every single person of African descent living in this country would receive reparations, because every day we must deal with the slings and arrows of discrimination and racism, whether or not our ancestors were enslaved. Until others can walk in our shoes, they cannot or will not understand the feelings of entitlement that so many non-African Americans have. And they cannot understand how those feelings impact the physical, mental, and emotional health of every single African American, regardless of whether or not their ancestors were enslaved. At the very least, this is my hope. African American descendants of enslaved people receive reparations. Those descendants who live their lives as African Americans and are descendants of the enslaved in the United States receive reparations. Those who live their lives as descendants of enslaved people in the United States and are African Americans outside of the U.S. would receive reparations.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Your time is up. So the next person we'll go to is Dr. Hollins, who will speak on pre-K to 12th grade education institutions.
Thank you.
I just would like to remind you all, this panel, panel number 1, is titled Pre-K to 12th Grade Education Institutions. So our next speaker is Dr. Etta Hollins.
Thank you. Thank you. First, I want to just acknowledge for the comments that I've heard so far, and to also acknowledge that I'm a 7th generation on this continent. And I too have done a great deal of genealogy. My second great grandmother, Mandy Colson, was a slave, and I knew her personally. She died when I was age 13. 2 of my great grandfathers actually fought in the Civil War. So I just wanted to present my pedigree before I start, because that seems to be important here. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I really want to talk about is pre-K through 12th grade education. And I want to begin with a quote from Audre Lorde, who wrote an essay titled, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House." And I want us to think about that as we move forward, because we actually have a house here that is not serving us well, and it's called the schoolhouse. So that's what I want to talk about, is what goes on in the schoolhouse. So my purpose here is to take a look first at where we are in California in the education of African American children. And then I want to discuss an approach to literacy for African American children that can be community-based, that we can take charge of the actual education of our children in terms of developing literacy. So that's the thrust of what I want to talk about here. Okay. All right. I don't want to lose my time. So. Okay. All right. So what we want to talk about here is the fact that in California, when we look at the demographic breakdown in terms of the academic performance of African American children underperform their peers, especially in reading and mathematics, but in other subjects as well. But if they underperform in reading and mathematics across all the grade levels, that puts subsequent education and subject matter study pretty much out of reach. So we see here the disparities in math, and we see that African American children are well on the bottom in California. They underperform all other subgroups. If we look at the suspension rate for African American children, again, we see African American children at the top of this chart, you know, moving from 13% down to 9% now, when African American children's representation in the school population is much smaller than their representation in suspensions, and I don't have data on expulsions, but we also have this disproportionality in involvement with the police. Now, these data have improved recently since the U.S. Department of Education has sent advisory letters regarding the zero tolerance policy that was active in all of our schools that resulted in the expulsion, suspension, other kinds of harsh punishment for African American children that was very disproportionate to their numbers of enrollment in schools. And so if we look at this, we can see that the social context in schools has been very negative for African American children. And by the way, this is true whether African American children are in schools that are predominantly white or whether they're in schools that are predominantly Black. Because all of these institutions have been shaped by Eurocentric values and practices. And we have to be very aware of that is a very difficult thing to change. And it's based on more than just racism, although racism plays a part here, but a lot of it is based in Euro-American cultural perspectives and values. And it is those cultural perspectives and values that are the most difficult to uproot. And so we really have to think about what that is and what that means. And so if we were to think about what some of those cultural values are, we would see that we find them in terms of how individualistic schooling is, how competitive schooling is, even beginning in kindergarten, first grade. And we begin to see that the curriculum itself and how that curriculum is delivered is very Eurocentric. The pedagogy is Eurocentric. And when I'm saying these things, I'm saying these things as an individual who has practiced in education for 55 years. I'm not a newcomer. I spent 20 years with K-12 schools and 35 years preparing teachers. And so you will see that I have quite a number of publications, and I've done longitudinal studies, especially on the teaching of reading for African American children. And so what I'm talking to you about today is the fact that literacy is actually foundational to everything that our children will do. It is totally foundational. It is how children develop their cognitive abilities, their mental abilities, their ability to think and reason is contained in whether or not they become literate, okay? This literacy supports access, and it manages how we look at information. It enables us to share our thoughts in organized and reasonable ways. These are just some of the things that are important. So what is it that has not worked in terms of the development of literacy in our children, okay? Initial reading based on systematic phonics has not worked. And I could sit here and explain to you linguistically why it has not worked for African American children, but I don't really have that amount of time because somebody's going to tell me to shut up in a few minutes. Repeating a grade to increase time for learning to read has not worked. Remediation and assignment to special education has not worked. Summer school for intensive reading instruction has not worked. Tutoring programs have not worked. Parent training programs, for the most part, have not worked. Okay? See, I get caught up in this and I forget to move on. These are the things that have not worked. Okay. So if we look at these things, what is it that we need to be thinking about? So we think about the relationship between culture, cognition, and learning. Think about those three terms: culture, cognition, and learning. All of our children are socialized in a particular way. They have apprenticed in a particular thought process from infancy. If a child goes to school and school does not build upon that apprenticeship that the child has already engaged, the child is at a disadvantage. This is not about the child not having vocabulary, which is what the public is told. It's not about that. It is about the thought process. It is about holistic thinking versus linear thinking. Eurocentric thinking is very linear. African American, Native American thinking is very holistic. And so you would have to use a different kind of pedagogy. So laying it out here in my presentation would take a little bit of time, but there is a graphic. If somebody wants to access it, you can actually see how I have laid out this relationship between culture, cognition, and learning. And if you wanted to look at it in more detail, I have a book that has been out for quite some time called Culture, you can't hear me? Called Culture and School Learning, that would actually go into detail about this relationship between culture, cognition, and learning. And you would see the strong reference to African American children in that book. So how would we actually go about creating a community-based literacy approach that would get the children literate? Now, I can promise you that you can go, if you follow this process that I'm going to show you, that you can go from the bottom to the top in not more than 3 years. You can take the children from the very bottom where they are right now to complete literacy for 90% of all of our children. So I'm going to show you quickly how that works. So this is a situation where my it's not working. Can you move it for me?
Where's the tech person to assist her?
Okay, so let me just continue. So I'm suggesting a process that is fairly simple and straightforward and is based on a considerable amount of research and my own practice.
One moment. We're going
Because-
to get a tech person to help assist you because there might be people who are neurodivergent and would like to see the visual aids as you present. So could we have someone from the DOJ assist her if possible, if she's having difficulty? Thank you.
Did I move on?
Just move on. Thank you.
Okay, so this particular approach, I'll just sort of use the technical terms that you can read later. But what we want to make sure is that children develop fluency, reading comprehension, and that they develop a deep understanding of their own cultural identity, and that they develop self-confidence in their literacy. So in the African American community, there are particular values and practices that we engage in that if we actually applied them to literacy, our children would become literate almost without even thinking about it too much, okay? And so how I have in this graphic represented it is a process that's read, react, produce, and perform. Read, react, produce, and perform. And so what that means is that in the African American culture, we have developed a lot of literacy materials, whether they are narratives or plays or short stories or novels or essays or children's books. Those things actually exist. And so if we take those and we put them with the African American oral tradition, if we combine it with the African American oral tradition of storytelling, poetry reading, spoken word, tall tales, rap, if we tie it to that, then we have a situation of literacy development that serves a cultural basis and an academic basis simultaneously. And what happens is that the children learn to read, to recognize the words in the passage. They learn to react, which means that they're going to produce something from it, which develops reading comprehension. They're going to design something for a performance, which further enhances the understanding. And then they do what most of our children love to do best. They get to perform in front of somebody, okay? And so what we're talking about here is how you get children literate quickly and painlessly, and at the same time enhance their understanding of their ancestral heritage, how they come to develop a space for themselves, and how they come to see role models in their own community. Because all of these things that I'm saying, there are Black people in the community who engage in these crafts. But the children don't know who they are. They have not heard or read these people's work. We could do this. One of the things that I did not include here was the development of lyrics for music and the performance of music. What I'm really talking about is using history, literature, the visual and the performing arts as the source for teaching African American children full literacy, their own history, their own culture, using their own oral tradition. And that's kind of the, without getting too much into detail about it, that's kind of what I'm suggesting, the read, react, produce, perform. I don't have all of the genres listed here. I just tried to list enough so that you'd be able to see what I'm doing in terms of the literacy. And then the oral tradition, I don't have all the forms here, but there are enough here that you can see where I'm headed in terms of what I'm suggesting with combining African American history and culture in the generation of literacy. When we get to the end here, I mentioned that what you're going to get here is African American children who have much greater academic competence, self-esteem, and social skills, because they will have had a lot of practice in interacting with other people and in communicating their ideas. You have that appreciation for accomplishments. There's some things that I could say about program management, but I don't think that time is going to permit that. I have a list of references here, and the references are from my own work, but they're also from research on the use of the method of repeated reading for the teaching reading and neurological impress, which is those two things are combined in this process if you want to know the academic background for it. And then I just mentioned this whole thing about learning mathematics, and there are a number of different ways that we can use cultural factors in the teaching of mathematics, but I don't have really time to go into that. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hollins, for your incredible expert testimony. So we'll now turn to Maisie Chin, who is here remotely, actually. She's remote. So Maisie Chin, are you available?
Yes, good morning. Here I am. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Oh. Great, thank you. And thank you to the expert witnesses that just preceded me. Good morning, members of the task force. Thank you for having me today and considering this testimony as part of your study. I, like so many others, deeply appreciate your work and commitment, and I am certainly humbled and honored to be part of today's hearing and to have the opportunity to share remarks. My name is Maisie Chin, and I am the co-founder and executive director of Cadre, which stands for Community Asset Development, Redefining Education, a community-based parent organizing center in South Los Angeles. Our mission is to solidify and advance parent leadership to ensure that all children are rightfully educated, regardless of where they live. And we effect policy change and we mobilize political will through parent participation models that preserve and expand the right to education for all South Lake children and youth. We envision schools that respect and cultivate the humanity, collective spirit, and resilience of African American and Latinx families, and contribute to a shared vision of South LA as a unified community with conscious power and self-determination. For today's presentation, you will hear or see some interchangeability between the terms Black and African American, given our organization's practice of using the former. So I hope the slide one is up, but now we're going to go to slide 2, please. The vision and mission of Cadre started to take root in 1999. I'm speaking before you today, having had the privilege and daily earned trust of shepherding our work coming to fruition over 2 decades of hands-on experimentation. Experimentation to deepen parent engagement at a grassroots level, to tap into parent leadership in transformative ways, and to confront and alter the power dynamics between parents and schools. Everything I'm able to share today comes organically from our grassroots, community-based, place-based, and parent-centered practice of problematizing the barriers to relationships between parents and schools that are at the root of any perceived barriers to parent engagement based on assumptions about parent behaviors. Our founding parents were focused primarily on systemic anti-Black racism in schools, including its impact on Latinx families in creating the racial competition that often manifests between parents and shapes the culture and climate of racialized parent involvement at each South LA school. That boldness continues to be their legacy today. We have come to reframe these perceived barriers as actually rooted in cumulative harm to African American parents that has yet to be identified and articulated. And we hope that Cadre's work plants seeds in that process. Within the K-12 educational context, we offer, as critical consideration and accompaniment to today's examination, our laser focus on harm to African American parents as rights holders and advocates for their children. From the beginning, we have employed the approach of starting with, centering, and illuminating through parents' own stories and reflections what we have treasured as raw data, which is the intergenerational experiences of African American parents and the specific marginalization of African American parents. By creating a space for their stories to be heard, to be Cadre's starting point, we were able to recognize the intergenerational exclusion of African American parents. Our parents began to think critically about their parents' approaches to advocacy and involvement, the degree to which their parents' behaviors towards their schools were rooted in the previous generation's experience. And our parents began to recognize the alienation of and harm to their parents, which impacted their educational experiences, which shaped their approach to their children's education. Needless to say, this reflection and memory recall yielded a connection even further back to how enslaved African American parents were denied their right to parent, to protect, and to keep their families together. Slide 3, please. The history is well documented, but it is not cut. And so the results of our parents' willing, courageous, and continuous inquiry into the historical context and patterns of their personal experiences of exclusion as parents are what bring us to what we humbly but boldly offer in today's hearing. Our parents' stories helped us problematize the root causes of African American parent alienation from school. out of which we recognize the tendency to blame, shame, and punish parent behaviors, the tendency to pit parents against one another under the guise of urging parents to seek competitive advantage as the only path to attain competitive advantage for their children. We recognize the typical limitations of American, typical ways that African American parenthood is limited, the expectation of the suppression of rage, the retaliation of the slightest expression of anger, and the immediate perception of African American parents as threats if there is disagreement or an assertion of their rights. The diminished prospects of even physical safety on school grounds. We recognize that the full freedom of expression is rarely offered to African American parents, even less so to extremely marginalized parents, whose children are often in the crosshairs of multiple forms of educational exclusion and permanent alienation from the learning process. Slide 4, please. We recognize that simply, quote unquote, improving parental engagement would fall well short of leveraging parent power to improve educational conditions, let alone outcomes. The experiment became one of redefining power dynamics between African American parents and schools, which inherently meant building parent power. We knew that only community organizing or parent organizing strategy would give us the chance to do this. Organizing is inherently about building power through consciousness, leadership development, power in aligned numbers, and issue campaigns fundamentally alter power relations and change material conditions. But what is quote unquote parent power if African American parents are denied their power and African American students are denied access and equity in K-12 education? What is African American parent power if African American parents whose children are almost always caught in the school to prison pipeline in one form, degree, or another, if African American parents cannot dislodge their children from this track? Slide 5, please. To demonstrate what we mean, I will share the turning point for co-founder Rosalinda Hill, may she rest in peace. Rosalinda was the mother of 5 children of both African and Mexican descent, who she knew the world would view as Black. In the late 1990s, Rosalinda was the parent who attended everything her children's schools offered. She eventually was hired as the paid community representative at her youngest son's elementary school, which is part of a special initiative for 10 schools with the highest African American student populations. Not only was she a participant in numerous meetings and trainings and conferences, Rosalinda had been a constant presence on campus every day for numerous years by that point. She greeted parents at the gate every morning. One day, she found out after the fact that her youngest son, who had an individual education plan, was disciplined by being put in a classroom closet. This turned everything on its head for Rosalinda, and when the prospect of co-founding Cadre was presented to her, she realized that her power had been tokenized. If she was such a presence on campus, known to all school staff, was a designated community representative, and was as involved as a parent could be at that point, accepting all of the institutional invitations, but she still could not prevent this type of discipline from happening to her second grade son with an IEP and all of the rights that are supposed to be associated with it. What exactly does parent power, American parent power, exactly look like? When Rosalinda and I began Friday evening house meetings from 1999 to 2001, the even greater distance between an involved and racially conscious parent such as Rosalinda and parents who we met knocking on doors across different areas of South Los Angeles was expected to sobering. Almost all of the parents, and quite frankly, even the parents who've been trained by the school district, still experience observable dissonance with the institutional language and jargon of education and educational reform, of the strategies for pursuing greater access and equity. While what schools asserted as access and equity goals and how much they needed parents to be involved, cited about them, while they sounded like opportunity on the surface, little was being done to address the complete real-life alienation from understanding the process, the steps, the participation that pursuits of access and equity require, let alone the sheer logistics and time commitment that were at direct odds with the logistics of their lives. Real peace for these efforts was elusive and very rarely created. When the stakes were raised through the authorization of the No Child Left Behind Act, this chasm only increased. Slide 6, please. Back in the early 2000s, research that supported this type of practice of working with parents that examined specific negative impacts African American parent alienation from schools on K-12 student outcomes, it was difficult to find or hard to come by, especially as a community-based organization working at a very grassroots level and building out this practice from scratch. Needless to say, there was and continues to be a research imperative here, although the academic inquiry around examining the contradictions in parent engagement has grown considerably in the last decade and a half. Slide 7, please. Our response was to use participatory action research to produce parent-centered narratives. We started in 2004 with a report that established how non-existent the relationships were between schools and South LA parents, as well as the parents' reasons for why. We disaggregated our data. 62% of African American parents surveyed felt that their opinions are sometimes almost never taken into account by schools when important decisions are made about their children. And over 3/4 of the 122 parent respondents reported feeling racially based bias. None of this was surprising, of course, but it was important that we had a way of documenting the cultural disrespect, the lack of authentic engagement, and general accountability from parents' perspectives. We began to document what Cadre would eventually be most known for impacting, which is school pushouts and the school-to-prison pipeline. But we wanted to ensure that we were known for doing it from a parent perspective, and in particular, our African American parents who were formerly incarcerated or who experienced the impact of incarceration directly. They were who led the way. We documented the negative impact on family and parent mental health whenever children were removed from class or suspended from school without due process or parent notification. Even more so if it was done harshly with implicit or very explicit racial bias and without recourse to recoup learning. The ripple effect of profiling African American students for removal disproportionately led to parent stress and anxiety, be it reconciling what felt like powerlessness regarding their stated rights, be it figuring out how to care for children who as a result lost interest in school or got depressed, or how to juggle such disruption in childcare. And after we leveraged this data collection to usher in a period of dramatic policy changes locally and statewide, and narrative shifts nationally on alternatives to suspension, to racially biased school discipline, and overly criminalized school climates, we trained parents to monitor the fidelity of policy implementation, specifically in South Los Angeles schools, and specifically whether African American student outcomes improved. And to this day, despite ushering a decade's worth of school-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports, restorative justice, transparency around school discipline data, we cannot look away from the harsh reality that upon close examination, African American students are still the most frequently suspended, detained, arrested, and permanently removed from our school campuses. I know my colleagues will address the school-to-prison pipeline forthrightly this afternoon. In a number of respects, this presentation could have been part of the third panel later this afternoon. However, we felt it was equally important to firmly make the linkages between African American parent exclusion and African American student exclusion from this country's educational wealth, as well as the historical precedents of disinvesting from and destroying not just African American parent economic stability, but also their agency as rights holders and harm preventers in a compulsory public education system, which will in turn punish and criminalize African American parents if they do not send their children to schools that are not free from harm. We continue to ask, how can you love the kids but hate the parents? It is clear that parent power in general, and African American parent power in particular, would benefit from a bold redefinition that takes into account the level of human defense and advocacy required to ensure African American student safety in all dimensions in schools. Slide 8, please.
Ms. Chen, you have 5 minutes.
Yes. Perfect, thank you. Slide 8. This next slide is meant to collectivize and summarize the recurring themes that we found not only through our community-based participatory research, but our on-the-ground organizing. There are no standards for how parents, especially African American parents, are treated at schools. Parents are rarely believed and their complaints often go undocumented. Racial bias leads to African American students and their parents concurrently being profiled, and defending their rights does not often add value or remedy, but more often targeting and retaliation. Slide 9, please. We have built national and statewide coalitions and movements aimed at ending the school-to-prison pipeline, decriminalizing our schools, abolishing law enforcement ideologies and practices in our schools. And yet we are falling short on remedying violations of both students' and parents' rights in concert, most of which happen as a result of criminalizing and entrenching poverty across multiple generations of African American families. Slide 10, please. At Cadre, we firmly believe that without the intentional disempowerment of African American parents as defenders of their children's humanity, the school to prison pipeline simply would not be. Slide 11. As we consider educational denial in setting a framework for reparations, we humbly but boldly recommend that the task force take heed of the limitations of policy solutions and institutional reforms by themselves without an accompaniment of recognition of the harm caused by this country's denial of African American parent agency. In fact, it has served as a template for curtailing the power of African American, Indigenous, Latinx, and marginalized parents of color across the board. Slide 12. At this point, we have accumulated through community-based research and transformational parent organizing a wealth of anecdotal evidence of how intergenerational African American parent exclusion eliminates an important pillar of remedy and harm repair, which is parent agency and power. We urge the task force in its proceedings to make deliberate room for further inquiry, testimony, and space holding of this unaddressed harm. Slide 13. Thank you, members of this task force, for listening to and receiving my remarks today on behalf of the parent leaders of Cadre. And thank you again for your work. I welcome questions and further dialogue to the greatest extent possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chin, for your expert testimony. So we'll now turn to comments and questions from the task force in the event that there are any comments and questions. Esteemed members of the task force, are there any comments or questions for either Ms. Hines, Dr. Hollins, or Ms. Chin?
So I have a question for Maisie Chen. Maisie, of course, you know I'm familiar with your work in parent organizing, and I'm remembering some of the data from back about 10 years ago, maybe, where there was an attempt to understand, how to what's the best practice for Black parent organizing when it comes to education involvement and education reform. One of the things that came out of some of that early work was the fact that people weren't paying attention to the fact that Black parents who may be trying to advocate on behalf of their children were also at the same time working through their own trauma experience at the hands of the education system. And I was wondering whether or not you had any additional thoughts you might want to share about that, and whether or not there are any strategies to assist Black parents to be able to advocate for their own children while at the same time healing from their own trauma at the hands of the education system and its personnel.
Thank you, Dr. Grills, and it's a pleasure to receive your question today. And absolutely, absolutely that I didn't have time to fit that into this presentation, unfortunately, but I definitely want to acknowledge what you brought up and said that that is a huge part of our model, is to recognize that trauma and how it shows up and how parents choose to advocate, choose not to advocate, to be worried about child welfare knocking on their door or someone filing a report about them. There are many ways in which that trauma manifests, and a lot of it has to go it goes all the way back in many cases to childhood. Many parents who can testify to how their own educational experiences and then their parents, experiences as their advocates, how they all sort of converge to create a framework of survival and protection from further harm and trauma. And that if that is the MO of parents for survival, and yet at the same time their children are recklessly pushed out of school, harassed at school, even by adults, unfortunately, and yet the very person who is expected to stand up for them, but will be punch for them. That type of traumatic, walking into that type of traumatic experience is especially daunting. It often suppresses Black parents, especially if it's clear emotionally that angst, are auspicious. We certainly in our early days, knew about parents who had the police called on them, who had, because of their frustration of not getting answers, emotions would escalate. And of course, that would then tap into a lot of past trauma of not being heard or being ignored. And sometimes parents who'd already been ignored at schools, that would be built up into the compound the next time they were ignored. And so I thank you for your question because it really does tap into an incredible amount of healing work that has to be done. We do it at Cadre, but it is nowhere near enough. And that trauma, unfortunately, it can often be passed on to subsequent generations, which we all know. And so it is imperative that we actually humanize parents, recognize that trauma and how it impacts their voice and their advocacy. So thank you.
Can I respond to that question also? What we did in Eastside Union was form the African American Parent Coalition at each of the schools. And then with the school's database, notified each and every African American parent that we were going to meet on a certain day in a certain place. Then once we had the parents there, and we've listened to all of the complaints, we organized it through Omega Psi fraternity that their retired members would meet the students the male students after school, picking them up at the classroom door, walking them over to another classroom, providing snacks, and they received on-campus tutoring in whatever area that they did not have an A or B in. Therefore, and we pitched it to the students as, you are not eligible for a team if you don't have good grades. You don't have good grades in this subject, this is where you need to be tutored. The parents bought into it because their kids were supervised, fed, and learning. We also organized the African American teachers to address problem issues in each of the schools. And the reason I said we started with the males because their grades were less than the females' grades. Then we have in the state of California, the United Black Student Union of California, and each of our African American student unions belong to that. There are meetings of each African American Student Union or DSU at the local school every week. There would be a meeting. Then we had meetings for the region, and it varied where each school, different schools in different districts would host those meetings. And at those meetings, the students were taught how to dress for success, what to do when people make unkind comments, including teachers, on touching you or checking you out because you look or different than the European American students, how to get good grades. Then there is also a state convention every year around Palm Sunday, Easter Sunday, around that time every year. So it's not an exact date. And each of these guest speakers are brought in. There are vendors. And for the first time for many of the students, they get to see a large number of African American students to give them support. And of course, with social media, then their social interests improve. And with that, their grades improved. So I have had to teach students how to tie a tie, how to behave when you go to a formal dance, because the activities end with a dance. There's a church service, there are workshops so that the kids are monitored at all times. At many times, they had never been away from their parents' homes overnight, flown on a plane, been on a train, etc. So we did immersion, as so to speak, on how to make them successful at the next level, whether it's college or a trade school or whatever it is that they were going to do after high school. So by organizing the parents and then the students, grades went up. In addition to trying to bring up the kids who were at the bottom of the pile as far as their egos went. For example, at one of the high schools in the district, the special ed speech department is held in a converted bathroom, you know, where the doors go both ways. That's demoralizing to know that your classroom is in a bathroom. It tells what the district thinks about you. I worked hard to get the classroom that I have. I chose my classroom at a new school from the blueprint. The moment I retired, they took that classroom away from the special education department and gave it to the science department because I had arranged through the district's special ed funding to have plumbing so we could have a sink so I could teach life skills.
Thank you. We're running into
Could
the
I
lunch
just make
period.
one comment
Last
on
comment
this?
from Dr.
Yeah, I'll be brief. We have to remember that by 12th grade, less than 16% of African American children read at grade level. Less than 16%. That's what we're really talking about here. So when I think about parent advocacy, so some of us who are in education have to be really honest about our own experiences in advocating for our own children in the system, okay? So my children were all educated I have two children, they were educated in California public schools. My grandchildren were educated in California public schools. And let me tell you that I have tried advocating, I'm a person with a PhD, I have tried advocating for my own children and grandchildren in California's P-12 schools, in the Bay Area and in Southern California. And what I can tell you is that it's more than an effort, because it is both academic, it's pedagogy, and it's the social context. It's all of those things combined, okay? And that when you go in and your child is not learning to read, if you're a parent and you don't understand how literacy is working, advocacy is not going to get you very far because you don't understand what the problem really is. I can tell you that for my second child, by the time she got in second grade, I realized that I was going to have to teach her to read myself. Let me tell you, it took me 2 weeks to get her to grade level. But schools have been trying for 3 years, and they were ready to place her in special ed. That's my child, okay? My child. The mother with a PhD, okay? Same with my granddaughter. My oldest granddaughter went to school knowing how to read. By the time she finished kindergarten, she could not read her own name. That was called cognitive reversal based on phonics. I understand that because I have training in literacy. I understood how to get her back on track. A layperson would not understand that. And so I think these are the things we actually have to confront, that this is where our children are. This is why I am advocating for a community-based literacy program grounded in the culture and the oral tradition, because it overcomes the things that we're talking about that stop our children from learning to read. And let me tell you, if our children don't learn to read, their education is over.
And they have to learn by third grade. If they haven't learned by third grade, they're put in special ed.
That's exactly right. But those children can learn to read after third grade, and I can tell you that for sure, because I taught for the California Youth Authority, and I could take children who were totally illiterate, who were 12 and 13 years old, and in 3 months, I could have them fully literate. And it's using the kind of techniques that I'm talking about here, okay?
Thank you so much. I had a follow-up question, really quick follow-up question. Can you speak to any implementation efforts of a program like that in the past?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are a couple of different places where I have done two 3-year longitudinal studies on teaching reading to African American children. One actually in Oakland Unified and the other in Dayton, Ohio. But in those situations, I was actually working with teachers to get teachers to understand how to get the children literate. And we actually did that. And that is explained in my book called Learning to Teach in Urban Schools. If you want to read that, you can get a detailed accounting of exactly how I did it, okay? We don't have time to actually go through that here, but that is the reference for it. And the problem with it though, I need to tell you, is that when I did it in Dayton, I had an opportunity to follow for like 10 years to see if the teachers could maintain that. The teachers were able to maintain that as long as they believed that I was doing data collection. As soon as they found out that I was not collecting data, they reverted back to the school district practices. And when they reverted back to the school district practices, within 3 years, they were performing back where they had performed before. And that is why I am advocating for a community consistent approach to the teaching of literacy for the children.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hollins. Thank you again, Ms. Hines, Dr. Hollins, and Maisie Chen for your incredible testimony. Really appreciate it. So now we'll go to the next item on
I was just going to say something. About 4 years ago, the Legislative Black Caucus, we took a tour up to Silicon Valley, dealing with the issues that you're talking about, literacy and African-American performance. And what we found, even when there were students at grade level, be it at math, science, and English, they were required to repeat those classes. And by the time they got to the 10th and 12th grade or 11th grade, are you still experiencing that for even African-American students? And we think it's, again, the biases that we see in school, but we saw a lot of those students that were at grade level being forced to repeat it before going to college.
Absolutely, positively in the district where I just worked. For example, my son entered high school reading at the 96th percentile. The counselor looked at that and assumed it meant the 4th percentile. And that is why he had A's, because at the 4th percentile, anybody can get an A, was the counselor's reasoning. I found out, had to go through all kinds of hoops, even as an employee, to get him out of the remedial class and into the class where it wasn't the class he belonged. He actually belonged in what is now called AP classes. He still excels in reading as an adult, but if I had been a working parent not in the system, I might not have understood the coding on the schedule. That kind of an assumption. And the same thing happens to students today. For example, at my local high school, it is mostly a non-African American high school. If the parents of the students who are in the AP class discover that an African American is in their students group, they go to the principal and have the principal remove the non-African American from that group that has the one in the AP class, because they don't want to have an African American pull down the scores, even though the African American has better grades and is smarter than the others in the group. And that means if the group is supposed to meet on Wednesday, the kids would meet on Tuesday and then say, oh, we did the report already, I'm sorry. That kind of thing is so prevalent.
Thank you both for your excellent presentations. I would like to get your perspective on Marian Wright Edelman's Freedom School model as a possible viable educational template to enable our children to catch up academically and culturally.
Yes, I recently cited that in a paper written for the National Academy. I was advocating that as an approach to teacher preparation, actually.
I don't think they heard the response.
I guess
Can't
my
hear
mic,
you.
I guess my mic doesn't work. Pull it forward. Okay. So what I was saying is that I recently cited Marian Wright Edelman's Freedom Schools in a paper that I wrote for the National Academy of Education on teacher preparation. I was actually advocating it as a model for pre-service teacher preparation and for universities advocating that about community participation, about teachers participating in communities. And the advocacy is actually around what I have been talking about, and that is using the community's values, practices, perspectives in the education of the children, because that's what that whole Freedom Schools movement did. And it engaged teachers in coming to better understand the values, needs, aspirations, and the culture itself in African American communities. So yes, I do think that it is a potential model. The thing that, what I'm trying to emphasize though, is that it is a generally very good model and I would advocate for it anytime. However, I'm advocating specifically for literacy here because of the critical nature of literacy and because as an African American community, when we see that the institution cannot educate our children in literacy, we have to take responsibility for it. And it should be a part of what we're working with reparations for. That is that whole discrepancy in that literacy for our children. Without that, our children cannot move forward. That's why I'm feeling so strongly on that. For as a general model, Marian Wright Edelman got it right.
If there are only 44 sounds in the English language, if a sound is used every one sound for the entire week, then you've almost made it through the school year. I am the product of, I am a student who attended the only all for, by, and run by African Americans that was not connected with a parochial institution. I went there at 10 years old and I got Black pride. I mean, I really got it because everybody in my segregated community, both at school and home, was African American. I learned the creation by James Weldon Johnson by rote because the teacher said, memorize the poem. So I figured, hey, this is a good poem to memorize. But in general, the public schools do not, starting in pre-K, do not have books that represent our culture, do not play music that represents our culture, do not show dances, and I'm not talking about twerking, but other forms of dance that show our culture. So the kids aren't particularly interested. They don't see anything that reflects them. When they go to get a lunch at school and they say, why don't we ever have greens? And they say, you've got spinach, it's green. It's not the same.
Thank you so much. If there aren't any other questions or comments from the task force members, I would like to thank again Ms. Hines, Dr. Collins, and okay, and Maisie Chen. So it's now 11:59, and we will reconvene for our next agenda item in 30 minutes. Yes. So yeah, thank you. And the next agenda item will be expert scope of work presented by members Joan Lewis and myself. So thank you. We can now go to lunch.